I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the Jeep Grand Cherokee Trackhawk. Surely one of the most absurd vehicles offered on the Australian market, but that's okay because we kind of like absurd vehicles here on Chasing Cars, and you'd know that if you'd subscribed for a while, because essentially this is a Grand Cherokee, a fairly practical, fairly normal, mainstream to premium SUV with a giant 6.2 litre supercharged V8 shoved under this stubby bonnet. Now, it's pushrod V8, it's FCA's HEMI engine, putting out over 500 kilowatts of power and nearly 900 Newton meters of torque. Yes, those are metric numbers. I'll put the horsepower and the pound-feet up on the screen for your benefit, but no matter what currency you use for that stuff, this is a fast car. 3.7 seconds from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour makes it one of the fastest SUVs on the planet, and I happen to think that's pretty cool. And I don't think this sort of vehicle is going to last forever. So, should you consider the Grand Cherokee Trackhawk if you're looking for a fast but practical SUV? Well, in today's video, we're going to be looking at the stuff this Jeep does well and also not so well. For me though, one thing it does do well is I think it looks pretty good, especially in this nice menacing grey with the grey light alloy wheels. I just think the Grand Cherokee design has actually dated quite well, especially given this is an older SUV now. Outside it's good. Inside, oh, the beeping. I tell you, the beeping. Inside, it's not too bad. I wouldn't say the cabin is held up quite as well as the exterior, but it's nothing to complain about, especially because this Trackhawk has the optional signature leather-wrapped interior package, which means that basically everything you look at and touch is covered in real leather, like up here on the dash, on the doors, down here where your legs rest. It's actually remarkably premium, but it needs to be because this thing is expensive for a Jeep, that's for sure. Now, when you climb in, you like sink into these big lazy chairs. They are seriously chunky. They're not especially supportive. They do have these kind of enlarged bolsters compared to a normal Jeep, but like you still have a lot of lateral movement in the corners, as we'll see shortly. And the leather is kind of that like soft and like really squishy type. So I wouldn't say they'd be the most supportive over long distances, but I think they get the job done fine. They also look pretty cool. Plus, I really like these blood red seat belts, a bit different to the normal fire engine red you seem to find on these kinds of interiors. Now you look ahead at this steering wheel, which is kind of an unusual shape down here, perforations, you got paddle shifters, you got this silver detailing, it's whatever. You look forward at these gauges, which I think are kind of cool. You've got a digital portion in the center and an analog speedo, temperature gauge and fuel gauge. I think on the whole it looks pretty cool. Then you cast your eyes over to the center here. There's an 8-inch square touchscreen, which is an unusual aspect ratio. Fans of FCA products will have seen this a million times before. It runs Uconnect software and it's really easy to use. It's also really snappy, which I love. It goes from page to page with no delay, and it makes using it really simple. Plus you have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto really nicely integrated and clear buttons. So in terms of functionality, the Jeep's interior makes it really easy to work with. In terms of practicality, it's okay. We got big cup holders, got some storage here with 2 fast charging old style USB ports. We've got a 2-level box here, flock lined on one bit, and then a really big also flock lined section below that. So on the whole, I actually quite like the cabin. Let me know down below the video what you think. Let's see if your kids will fit in the back. As the beeping starts back up, I wonder if that can be turned off. It'd be nice if it could. Now, nice thunk on the door, though in terms of quality, there's one or two funny little aspects of quality to this car, and it is after all a Jeep Grand Cherokee, so it's a good thing it's now offered with a 5-year warranty. But in terms of space back here, it's pretty good. Now this chair is a little pushed back from my normal driving position as it sort of slides back to let you out, but in terms of headroom, I've got plenty, another 2 or 3 inches above me despite this sunroof here. Legroom is fine, tow room's generous, and you can easily fit 3 adults across because that floor is really low despite the standard 4-wheel drive system. We have a flip down armrest with cup holders. This whole backrest reclines, as you can probably tell. We've got air vents, another 2 fast charging USB ports, and even seat heaters back here, which is plush. And all that leather lining survives into the second row. Now, let's head around the back, while I remind you that the Grand Cherokee, despite its size, has only ever been a 5-seater, which I think kind of counts against it. The next Grand Cherokee confirmed will have 7 seats, or there'll be an iteration of it, potentially that Grand Wagoneer name or what have you, will be a 7-seater. But this one only seats 5. However, the trade-off is that you get a nice big boot, more beeping. Once that door opens up, a bit creaky, you find that it's got a good sized boot, really nice wide aperture, completely flat floor, so you know your stuff just slides in and out cleanly, and some special features. It's quite thoughtful. 4 storage hooks, 12-volt socket. You've got a little bit of underfloor storage with a spare tire as well, and a cargo cover that retracts. Plus, if you are vertically challenged, it's quite nice because Jeep puts the button to close the boot nice and low, unlike others that make you reach up to the tailgate itself in order to close it. And isn't that thoughtful? But as the Trackhawk badge suggests, this vehicle is largely about driving, so let's go do some of that. So what is the Grand Cherokee Trackhawk like to drive? Well, there might be 1 or 2 buyers who take their Trackhawk to the track relatively often. I actually think the vast majority of people that buy this SUV are looking for something that will win the traffic light drag race and will let you kind of enjoy exploiting all of that performance every now and then. And that's why I've brought it to one of my favorite roads here outside Sydney to see whether it can kind of combine its immense straight line ability with the capability to tackle a typical Australian back road. And that's because while it's absolutely impressive what's sitting up the front of this vehicle, any sort of sports SUV worth their chops has to be able to do essentially what a fast wagon used to be able to do, and that is handle on a decent Australian B road. But first, let's talk about that ridiculous engine. So it's a 6.2 litre supercharged HEMI V8 petrol, 522 kilowatts of power, 868 Newton meters of torque, and that delivers a 0 to 100 time of 3.7 seconds, which makes it one of the fastest SUVs in the world. I mean, those are numbers that will give you serious bragging rights in the pub, and very few will be able to argue with. But probably even better than the straight line, attitude are the sounds that it makes, because at low revs, you just get ridiculous supercharger whine, and then after that, if you just charge on a bit harder, transitions into very, very angry petrol V8 roar as you reach up into the upper ranges of the revs. So it's kind of a bit of an aural symphony, giving you all the best noises of a gasoline-powered 8-cylinder with, big-time supercharged pleasures as well. It's remarkable to listen to both outside and in the cabin. You can hear it all really easily. So that's cool. It's fast, it sounds good. Does it handle? Well, yes and no. I mean, this is a heavy SUV, 2.5 tons. There's no calling it nimble or deft. It's kind of when the road opens up a little bit like it has now, that flowing corners are dispatched fairly easily. Now the tires are not all that sporty. We've got Pirelli Scorpion Verde all-season tires, relatively wide, 295 width all round, so they probably could have gone a little wider, but flowing roads, it does fine. It's when, the corners start getting really tight that the inertia becomes a problem and the Trackhawk starts throwing its weight around a little bit alarmingly. Now, the suspension tune is actually pretty good. It rides really well. That's especially the case in urban settings where it's perfectly livable every day. It's actually when the mid-corner bumps start getting a bit too serious and the corners start getting a bit too tight, this thing just starts throwing its weight around and you really have to stay on top of it. And on top of it is where you sit, because this isn't an SUV you sink down into. Instead, the feeling for me is more like riding a horse that's just been given a shot of adrenaline. So there is a bit of work to do in terms of managing all of those sensations, but you can keep on top of it if you put in the effort. Now, naturally, all that torque has to be sent to all 4 wheels or we'd be dealing with something rather unique, but it is still a rear bias setup here in the Grand Cherokee, and if you squirt it off the line or out of a corner, you will feel it squirm around at the rear end, which is quite entertaining. But ultimately, it's successful at dispatching its marvelous outputs to the tarmac with relative ease. Additionally, between those two systems, there's an 8-speed torque converter automatic with some pretty crazy sounding downshifts, especially from outside the vehicle, as that supercharger just plays such an aural role in the experience. Now, in terms of refinement, it isn't bad. There's a fair amount of road noise, even on smooth surfaces, being kicked up by those tires, but it's not the worst I've heard. Bumps, you certainly hear those, even though they don't crash through to the cabin too badly. Wind, it picks up a bit. The front end is a bit bluff, and we have these very squared off mirrors that are a little small actually, meaning the visibility isn't perfect, but it is acceptable enough. Adaptive safety isn't bad. We've got adaptive cruise control, we've got lane keep assist, we have forward collision warning and autonomous emergency braking, so there are a few systems there designed to keep you safe, but ultimately this is a large, heavy and incredibly fast SUV. It's not one that I'd be content handing the keys to an inexperienced driver to, simply because there's so much to manage. But for, you know, the driver who really wants a classic beefy American engine in a package that is, although slightly outrageous, ultimately kind of interesting and fun, the Grand Cherokee Trackhawk can make a lot of sense. Otherwise, I'd definitely check out its kind of stablemate in the FCA range, the Alfa Romeo Stelvio Quadrifoglio, which is so different, and I know it appeals to a totally different customer, but an interesting comparison nonetheless. So that is the Jeep Grand Cherokee Trackhawk. This thing is freaking wild, but I think it's all the better for that. You know what this is? This is an antidote to the BMW X5 M50i. If you hate the thought of a BMW X5, you'll love the Jeep Grand Cherokee. I think it appeals to a real subset of people looking for a performance SUV that goes really hard in a straight line. You're not all that interested in devouring corners that hard. Maybe you want to tow something big in the back and just drive a brash American supercharged V8 crossover SUV while they still exist. And I think that's totally fine. Let me know down in the comments what you think of the Grand Cherokee Trackhawk, any requests for the channel, and as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.